everybody, I hope everyone is doing well today. So today we'll be moving on to day 3 and I also have a lesson 3 planned. So I have quite a bit to do today. So we might as well get into it. This is for my section 4942 for my online Comp 1 class. So this is our Blackboard page. I have set up a few things. If you have not already caught up on day 1 and day 2 things, please make sure to go back and watch those videos. And in each and every video, I cover what you should be working on for each class session. So for today is our third day. So we are moving on to day 3 materials here. So if you have not already turned in the diagnostic essay and the discussion board number 1, please make sure to do so as soon as possible because those were due technically yesterday by midnight. So please make sure to catch up. It is up to each and every individual student to catch themselves up in this online course. So try to keep up, and that's extremely important. So I'm going to start, as always, with going into our schedule. And here is our schedule for today and what we should be working on. So this is the start of week 2. It is Tuesday, September 1st. So what we're going to be talking about today is different kinds of writing, and I will be revealing the first essay number 1, which is the DCA, or the Discourse Community Analysis. And I'll be talking about what a discourse community is. I'll also be talking about the reading from the textbook we did. I'll do like a quick summary of the textbook for the first week, and hopefully everyone has their textbooks in by the second week. I do expect students to order the textbooks, and after the second week, I expect them to begin reading independently because that is part of the homework is the readings. So the readings that I assigned for class coincide with what we're doing in the course during these video class sessions here. And then to do, what you should be working on is begin brainstorming for the first paper. And then on Thursday, I will be discussing the history of the essay, and we'll also continue Essay 1 invention work. And then over the weekend, should be reading chapters 29 and 30 in the textbooks, and reading response number 2 will be due by next Tuesday at noon. And you should continue the Essay 1 invention work on your own. So going from there, so we already did this day 1 and day 2 lesson here. And this is all stuff that I covered in the last video. So the things I'll be covering today is the day 3 lesson and also the DCA paper number 1 introduction. And like I said, I do have the second discussion board already posted. So if you have not already, please be sure to complete reading response number 1 and the diagnostic essay because I will begin grading those. And the reading response number 2 will be due on Tuesday, September 8th by noon. And I also did post the guidelines for the first paper that I will be going over as well today and probably Thursday as well for the essay number 1 materials. I have the guidelines, the rubric, and a sample essay, and also DCA reflection questions that I will be expected to answer those in your final draft of the paper. And just going back to that. So the draft of the first paper is due So the draft of the first paper is due Tuesday, September 22nd. That is when our rough draft will be due. And then for the final version of the DCA, for the first paper, DCA, Discourse Community Analysis, paper number 1, all the same thing. The final draft of the DCA will be due on Thursday, September 24th. And we will be doing peer review on Blackboard as well. So going from there, I would like to start with the day 3 lesson here. Okay, so this is like a summary, a quick summary that I made for the first week's worth of reading. So here's the chapter 1 overview, writing in academic context. So academic writing serves as a number of purposes: to argue or thinking about a topic and why, to report on what's known about an issue, and to propose a solution for some problem. And other keywords they use within that chapter is evidence, once you've considered the subject thoughtfully and have done the necessary research, an indication of why the topic matters and why your writing is worth reading, and as a response to what others have said. A thesis statement is very important in terms of this course. We'll be using a thesis statement throughout the whole semester. So a thesis statement is important in terms of stating your main point. Here's an example. Governments should not ban the sale of human organs. They should regulate it. Often qualifying your thesis statement is important in acknowledging that the subject is complicated and there may be more than one way of seeing it rather than making a generalization. A thesis statement is supported by evidence and good reasons for your argument or research. Academic writing is generally expected to be objective and less emotional. So chapter 1 goes on to talk about acknowledgement of multiple perspectives, contributing to a larger conversation, and carefully documenting your sources and paying attention to correctness. We will be talking about MLA style and formatting a bit later on in the semester. But the first paper is actually a personal narrative, so I'll be talking about that in a bit. So chapter 2 talks about many different reading strategies. Different reading strategies can include annotation, highlighting like important new vocabulary concepts, and picking out main ideas. Skimming a text, adjusting your reading speed, and looking for organization cues helps with reading. The introduction and thesis statement often give a preview of the topic and the main idea. Transitions help with moving from one idea to another, such as to another body paragraph. Dealing with difficult text, annotating can be useful. Highlighting keywords, phrases, sentences, or connecting ideas can be helpful. And there's an example of how to annotate text, and we'll also be talking about how to do that, and how you can even do that digitally. There's this new website called Hypothesis that lets each student annotate their own text online, which is pretty cool. And I might consider using that actually. So writing a summary or boiling a text down to its main ideas can be helpful. And you want to consider the rhetorical situation. What is the writer's purpose? Who is the intended audience? What is the genre? What is the writer's stance on the topic being discussed? What sort of medium is being used? And what sort of visuals are there? Printing out longer text is helpful so the reader can outline, annotate, summarize, or use one of these reading strategies. So a rhetorical situation is the text purpose. When was the text written and why? Is it a textbook or a classic work that lays out concepts fundamental to the field? And of course, your purpose as a reader. Why are you reading this text? And the audience. For whom was the text written? And there's also advice for reading across fields of study. So in the humanities, a lot of the text is based on stuff like novels, poetry, short stories, and you have to be aware between primary and secondary sources. In the social sciences, they talk about hypotheses, claims, reasons, and evidence presented in the text. And the sciences is based mostly on scientific method that often have claims, hypotheses that argue for them, often studies and experiments that have hypotheses and claims as well as an outcome following the scientific method. So what stood out from the reading to you? What did the chapter have to say about writing process? And if you have additional questions about Blackboard, there is a student orientation on Blackboard for further assistance, especially if you're having problems with that. So I do want to go ahead and take a moment to show everyone. So this Blackboard student orientation, you can self-enroll in the course. And it also talks about how to navigate discussion boards, how to navigate your online course, tips from the help desk, tips for managing and organizing your time, and if you need help with Blackboard. They also create videos, help videos for Blackboard. And it also discusses how to send an email through Blackboard. Now keep in mind, email and Blackboard are two totally separate systems. So your Google SUNY address, like your email, that is through Google email. So keep in mind when you go in to log in through your email, you're going through Google Mail and use your username and password. Now, if you send a message through Blackboard, you can do that. However, it does not allow you to reply to an email through Blackboard. So keep in mind, if you're having trouble with logging into email or Blackboard, those are two totally separate systems. So if you ever need help with the help desk, I would suggest taking a look at this JCC online orientation for Blackboard. And it also tells you how to reply to a discussion board and that kind of thing. So anyway, going back to this. So the rhetorical situation, what is it? The term rhetorical situation refers to the circumstances that bring text into existence. The concept emphasizes that writing is a social activity produced by people in particular situations for particular goals. Now, as a writer, we carefully think about the situation we find ourselves in and whatever might be appropriate to the situation and responsive to others' needs or even your own. That is true whether we're writing a workplace email or completing a college writing assignment. As a reader, considering the rhetorical situation can help you develop a more detailed understanding of others and their texts. In short, the rhetorical situation can help writers and readers think through and determine why texts exist, what they aim to do, and how they do it in particular situations. So thinking about that further, the audience includes the individuals the writer engages with in the text. Most often there is an intended or target audience for the text. So for the first paper in this case, your audience will be me. And of course maybe one other classmate during peer review. So the purpose is what the writer and what the text aim to do. To think rhetorically about purpose is to think about what motivated writers to write and what their goals of the texts are. So what is genre? The genre refers to the type of text the writer produces. Some texts are more appropriate than others in a given situation. Kinds of text or writing can fulfill different needs. This can be anything from an argumentative or research essay to a narrative, a letter, email, resume, and the Norton Field Guide on Writing offers further reading on genre. So this is a diagram of the rhetorical situation, which includes writer, subject, audience, genre, text, exigence, and purpose. Why is the writer writing about the subject? What the writer is seeking from the audience, and how the subject is presented to the audience. Now, back in ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle created the study of rhetoric as a way of persuading people through speech. Thus, the elements of logos, ethos, and pathos were born. It's important to be able to recognize the rhetorical situation because it shapes the fundamentals of a piece of writing like audience, purpose, and genre. So here are the three ethical appeals, and we will be using these quite a bit throughout the whole semester, so that's why I wanted to do like a sort of mini lesson on it. So ethos is appeals to credibility, reputation, and the trustworthiness of the speaker or writer, most closely associated with the voice of a piece. Pathos appeals to the emotions and cultural beliefs of the listeners or readers, most closely associated with the audience. And logos appeals to logic, reason, and facts in the argument, most closely associated with the message. So logical appeal is to make sure to sound inductive and deductive reasoning to speak to the reader's common sense. For example, in an essay proposing that participating in high school athletics helps students develop into more successful students, you could show graphs comparing the grades of athletes and non-athletes, as well as high school graduation rates and post-high school education enrollment. And pathos is emotional appeal. Is to garner sympathy, develop anger, instill pride, inspire happiness, or trigger other emotions while reading a piece of writing. When you choose this method, your goal is for your audience to react emotionally, regardless of what they might think logically. For example, if you were trying to convince your audience that a certain drug is dangerous to take, you might choose to show a harrowing image of a person who had a bad reaction to the drug. So in this case, the image draws an emotional appeal and helps convince the audience that the drug is dangerous. And of course, you have ethos, ethical appeal. So ethical appeal relies on the credibility of an author. For example, a college professor who places a college logo on a website gains some immediate credibility from being associated with the college. And it's used in advertising quite a bit as well. And even historical speeches have quite a bit of logos, ethos, pathos. Like if you take a look at Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, there is a lot of logos, ethos, pathos throughout many historical speeches. So that's why it's important to know these things. Ethical appeals can add an important component to your argument, but keep in mind that ethical appeals are only as strong as the credibility of the association being made. And this is the rhetorical triangle. So the speaker, ethos is a Greek term for ethics, and it has been made to represent the credibility of the person or the speaker. And in terms of audience, pathos, that is emotional appeal, instilling emotions within your reader. And then there's logos or logical appeal, which is providing proof or evidence to a claim. So that being said, I am going to move on to the DCA paper number 1, introduction. So what is it? What is this first paper that we're working on here? The discourse community analysis is an introductory first year composition assignment. That is a narrative essay that reintroduces students to basic paragraph structure, mechanics, and academic voice. So linguist John Swales defined discourse communities as groups that have goals or purposes and use communication to achieve these goals. When we are looking for a discourse community, we are looking for a group of people who share a set of discourses, understood as basic values and assumptions and ways of communicating about these goals. In other words, a discourse community is a group of people who share knowledge of a particular topic, similar backgrounds and experiences, values, and common ways of communicating. With discourse, there is an idea of insiders and outsiders. So, an example of a discourse community, we were just talking about this in my other comp course yesterday on Zoom. So, a lot of us came up with the examples of even joining JCC as a new student. That is a particular discourse community because a discourse community is a group of people that might share other similar values and also use similar languages, have similar goals, and also perform similar activities. So the example that I particularly used for myself is that I play Dungeons and Dragons on Friday nights online, and that is considered a discourse community because when we're playing the game, we use similar terms and language that an outsider of the group might not necessarily understand, like what a dungeon master is. And a dungeon master is also considered an expert in that particular discourse community because they are the one playing the game. Other examples we came up with was other activities even outside the classroom, or maybe you're involved with a club. If you're involved in like a book club or that kind of thing, you can also use that. Other examples might be maybe even gathering at a friend's house to watch hockey every week. That's considered a discourse community because you're sharing similar values, experiences, and also using similar language while talking about hockey. And I'm a huge fan of the Sabres, so we were kind of using that example too. But there are other many examples of this. Even when you're working somewhere, let's say that you work at a local retirement home. Like I know a few of my students work at the Pines, for example. So that's considered a discourse community along with your coworkers because you communicate with them all the time, you share similar values, you're performing similar tasks, and you're also associating with those people on a daily basis, and that's considered a discourse community as well. But yeah, I think those were the main examples that we came up with for the most part. And you might also play sports with other people on a sort of weekly basis. That's considered a discourse community too. If you're involved in student government, maybe at JCC. And other examples in this PowerPoint is included football, hunting, sailing, cheerleading. So many of those things are considered discourse communities. So done well, the DCA process will prompt essential skills of audience identification and recognition, confidence as a master and writer. So confidence as a master and writer in this particular case means that you are an expert on the subject. So in my case, when I use my example of being a sort of expert in the field of Dungeons and Dragons and gaming, I am an expert because I participate in that activity on a weekly basis. And it's also a great introduction to ethos, pathos, and logos, which we will be considering while drafting the paper. and a more nuanced understanding of the nature of perspective and belief. And it also leads to classroom community recognition of diversity. So, like I said, you are welcome to make any claim you wish, and for whatever reason you so choose, we are, after all, in a democracy. Just because I'm a Democrat, or because that's what I believe, are fine reasons for everyday dinner table conversation. Now, in terms of a personal narrative, in this case, you still have to use academic dialogue different from everyday conversation. You are expected to produce reasonable arguments that are well supported, informed, and that appeal to the values of a specific audience. And the specific audience, in this case, is myself and your classmates. So what are you doing within this essay? You're going to write a paper to me and your classmates about a time when you successfully joined a discourse community. Show us how you learned to make ethos appeals, how to establish and draw on your credibility, logos appeals, drawing on factual knowledge and ways of reasoning, and pathos appeals, drawing on the values and emotions of other members that were specific to the community. This essay is a narrative essay that will detail your personal struggle and work to become a legitimate member of some community. And the supporting details, the evidence, the ethos is yours and will come from your own experience. So like I said, that ethos, logos, pathos, that rhetorical triangle that I already have talked about, ethos is establishing credibility or trust, logos creates consistency and logic, and pathos creates emotions and imagination. Now we know from our practice in class now that logos means logic, that there is a certain manner of thinking and communicating. Members will have unique language, terminology, or discourse intrinsic to the community. So like I was saying, even like defining certain terms within your paper that an outsider of your discourse community might not know or understand is perfectly welcome to do so to create logos appeal in your paper. So in my case, in the example of Dungeons and Dragons, I might define what a dungeon master is because not everyone outside the game might not know details pertaining of what it takes to be a dungeon master because they are the ones that actually shape the setting and how the characters end up interacting with each other during the game. So ethos will be criteria for becoming an expert. There are those considered masters and they can be identified. So in the case of my example, an expert in Dungeons and Dragons would probably still be the dungeon master. And in Pathos, there will be specific values, traditions, and norms. Unless these norms are followed and tradition is met, one can be excommunicated from a discourse community. So this is the basic structure, introduction. I am a member because I have mastered the pathos and logos of the community, and I am recognized by other experts within that community. So there should be basic paragraph structure, mechanics, transitions, one idea at a time, topic sentences. Okay, so the claim and thesis statement. Your audience for this paper will want to know the main point of your paper right off the bat. So after deciding what discourse community which you want to write about, come up with a claim. And to review how to construct a claim or thesis statement, you can visit the Norton Field Guide 169 through 182. So your claim should be something along the lines, I am a legitimate accepted member of this discourse community because. Now we're going to be doing some in-class drafting, and I would encourage you to start pre-writing and start doing this on your own as well. I would definitely start working on the introduction and thesis statement. So what we're going to be doing for today is having everyone sort of free write and start in-class drafting here. Should be working on the introduction and thesis statement. Now be sure to explain to your outsider readers what is your subject and include a detailed thesis that states the main purpose of your essay. So this is an example. It took many years, many intense years of blood, sweat, and tears, but I eventually obtained a master's degree in English. I was finally accepted as an equal expert by the peers in my community, who now recognize me as a colleague. Okay, so logos. Appeal to logic is a way of persuading an audience with reason using facts and figures. So this is an example. History has shown time and time again that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, pathos appeal to emotion as a way of convincing an audience of an argument by creating an emotional response to an impassioned plea or a convincing story. And I also have a quote from the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King Jr. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair, I say to you today, my friends. And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. Now that instills emotional appeal to one's emotions because Martin Luther King Jr. is talking about the American dream, which is definitely a core value that was of historical significance, especially back then or even today. So ethos is a means of convincing an audience via the authority or credibility of the persuader, via a notable or experienced figure in the field or even a popular celebrity. So he is a forensics and ballistics expert for the federal government. So that is creating ethos because you are establishing credibility and authority in that statement. If anyone's qualified to determine the murder weapon, it's him. Okay, so you should start free writing. Think of a group, organization, sports team, or club you have been involved in or had been involved in. So it can include something that you're doing currently or in the past, and describe it. What kinds of people are there in your community? What do they like to do? Communities are no different than sets of conversations that must be mastered. They are similar to academic dialogue because they are also comprised of elements of ethos, pathos, and logos. Whether you know it or not, you are involved in hundreds of communities that share common interests, language, values, traditions, and norms. These communities are also full of so-called experts that have mastered the conversation at hand. Now, here's the drafting invention for the discourse community essay. So things to be thinking about when thinking about ethos, logos, and pathos. Who are the experts? What makes them experts? Are you an expert? How so? What terms are often used? What discourse is available that only insiders could know? And in terms of pathos, what traditions, values, and norms are present in your community? What do members hold dear? How do you know? And here's some of the assignment, but I do have formal guidelines, so I am actually going to skip that slide now and go into the paper guidelines. So what you're going to do is go under paper guidelines, go into essay 1 materials, discourse community essay. And once you have that folder open, what you're going to do is go into the DCA essay guidelines. And these are the formal guidelines or sort of an instruction manual or the process of how you should be drafting the discourse community analysis or paper number 1. And it defines what a discourse community is. It also has detailed instructions on how to do the assignment. So write an essay to me and your classmates about a time when you attempted to join a discourse community. And if you need additional details of what a narrative essay is, or how to approach a narrative, then you're welcome to read Chapter 10 in the Norton Field Guide to Writing. But basically what a narrative is the entire thing will come from you and your own experiences. So you will write the story of your own movement into or out of a discourse community. And like I said, it will be a personal narrative, so you can use the perspective of I, all you would like in this first essay. That point may be something, so you should be including a thesis statement as well. That point may be something you learn about yourself or about the community or about belongingness, but this thesis really is up to you. And this is when we start pre-writing, drafting, and doing the final draft. That's what I mean when process is such an important part of this course. So we'll be starting the pre-writing today. So like I said, you want to have a claim. You want to have support with reasons. Your reason should state that you mastered ethos, logos, and pathos appeals that were specific to that particular community. And of course, you're going to want evidence as well. You won't find evidence in the library or on the internet because the evidence in this case of this personal narrative will come from you. Provide specific examples and significant anecdotes as evidence. So in terms of style and tone, you want to know what you're talking about. So what you can do in terms of this narrative essay is provide details that show you've reflected deeply on your own experiences and supply enough evidence to support your reasons. You want to show regard for your readers. So in that case, if there's a term that is associated with your particular discourse community, you want to define it for your readers because, especially for me, if that's not something I know about, it's kind of helpful to know. And consider how you might appeal to me as your reader. Try to evoke emotions in your classmates, and that is how you're gonna how you're going to use pathos in terms of this essay. You can try to evoke emotions, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. And I would recommend reading the chapter 10 of the Norton Field Guide because it does have examples of what narrative essays are. And arrangement in terms of organization. You will want a introduction paragraph. And in your introduction, there should be a thesis, but also a larger conversation that thesis is responding to. And you want to fully explain the subject to the reader and indicate why the subject is important to the audience. And in terms of organization, in terms of paragraphs, you should have topic sentences that clearly state the main idea of the paragraph and supporting sentences that cluster around the main idea without detours. So if you need help with topic sentences organization and transitions, you can refer to the Norton Field Guide. They have all sorts of chapters on this kind of thing. So the essay itself will be about 4 pages, double-spaced, and Times New Roman. And it should be about 900 to 1200 words. And you will submit the assignment indicated on the syllabus and on Blackboard. And be sure to also save whatever you might have in terms of pre-writing, drafts, reflections, and the final draft. And if you have separate documents for those, I would definitely keep those because we will be using that for your Google website. If you have not already, please go back and watch day 2. The day 2 video talks about how to create a Google website, and we will be using Google websites for your final portfolio. And all of these different things, including pre-writing, drafts, reflections, and final drafts of all 3 papers, will be uploaded to your Google website, and that will serve as your portfolio that will be graded at the end of the course. And it is something we'll be working on throughout the whole semester. So if you have not already, I would go back and create a Google website for yourself, and at least just set that aside for now. I will be working on providing feedback on diagnostic essays once all of those are turned in, I will probably sit down, and I also have to grade diagnostic essays from my other comp course probably this weekend. Now, the final draft of each paper will be submitted on a Dropbox on Blackboard, and you can see the course schedule for details and due dates. So those are the guidelines. Now, this is the rubric that I will be looking at when grading the paper. So it does sort of give you the things that I look for when I'm grading the first paper, like having an introduction, a thesis, reasons, topic sentences, elements of logos, pathos, and ethos, and a conclusion, and proper grammar, style, and punctuation. And I also have a sample paper of a DCA here. So this example was submitted by a previous comp course, and we use it as a sort of example paper of what a DCA might look like. So in terms of this specific paper, the student chose to talk about joining a dance class. And you're certainly welcome to look at that at your own leisure. And like I said, it just gives an example. It doesn't mean you have to model your paper entirely on it, but in terms of what we look for, it just gives an example of what the essay might look like. Anyway, that is it for today. So in the day 3 video, I have discussed the Blackboard online orientation, and in case you're still having trouble with navigating Blackboard, you can always look at that. And I also talked about the course schedule, what you should be working on in terms of this week. And I also did lesson number 3. And I also did the paper number 1 introduction here. And I also showed everyone where they can find the guidelines for this first paper here. And discussion board number 2 is up already. So if you want to work on that, if you're done with everything else, you are free to do so. And like I said, I would definitely take a look at the paper guidelines. I would be working on the introduction and thesis statement of the first paper, and definitely take a look at the guidelines because we will be performing peer review online as well. And if you need details pertaining to when and what is due, you can of course always refer to the online schedule. Thank you. I hope you all have a great day. And please stay safe out there. Have a good one. Bye, everybody.